Hello and welcome back to this damn fully dualistic crusade. In this video, I'll be reviewing the Kino Lorber Blu-ray release of the 1944 PRC film Bluebeard, directed by Edgar G. Ulmer and starring the great John Carradine. This is a film with a great reputation among, of course, Carradine fans and in classic horror circles, but it's been a very difficult film to see in good quality. And while this is credited as a new 4K scan and master and is easily the best the film has ever looked on home video, it's still in very rough shape. This is not really a restoration. This is more of a preservation master. So no going in that this is still going to be in limited quality, but it is far beyond every other version we've ever had of this film, which has always seemed to have really terrible condition copies that have been floating around over the years. So this is really the first time you can see and hear the film properly, but again, it's unfortunately not a full restoration. The production history of the film is quite long, and of course goes back to Edgar G. Ulmer's days at Universal, when he was essentially at his career high after making the incredible, macabre, one-of-a-kind film The Black Cat, which didn't really endear him very well to the head of Universal, Carl Laemmle, and then his becoming essentially persona non grata and being blackballed in the industry after essentially meeting the woman that he would later marry and spend the rest of his life with. I was at the time married to one of the Laemmles working at Universal, so that essentially meant the rest of his career was trying to get work where he could find it, and he became essentially the master of the low-budget quickie at Monogram or PRC and any of the other Poverty Row studios, occasionally being able to go far beyond the extreme time and budget constraints of making films at the Poverty Row studios, sometimes in as little as a week or a week and a half in terms of the shooting days. Bluebeard was a film he actually did want to make at Universal, and obviously something he probably would have made with perhaps Boris Karloff or Bela Lugosi, or perhaps even both of them during the golden age of horror films. That was not to be, but it was resurrected when he was at the PRC studios to produce this 1944 film, which for a low-budget PRC film is definitely one you could label as a highbrow PRC film, if that's even really a thing. It's definitely aspiring to a level of class and intelligence that you don't typically expect from a low-budget Poverty Row film. The story is set in Paris, where there's a serial killer on the loose who's preying upon women, and their bodies keep turning up in the Seine. They keep floating down the river, and that's actually how the film opens, with the body being recovered. And the killer is referred to and known as Bluebeard. And then it becomes a matter of the police trying to ascertain who Bluebeard is and how to stop him before more women are killed. The film, being a PRC film that only runs 72 minutes, means that it's no surprise and no secret that John Carradine's character is indeed the serial killer known as Bluebeard. The fascinating aspect we quickly learn is that he is a man driven by his art, and he only kills after he's painted a beautiful woman and is thus compelled to kill the model that he has just painted. So there's an element of compulsion and a backstory that is revealed in the climax of the film that does add some nice psychological texture. The real draw of this film, though, and what makes it so special and why it has such a reputation in certain circles, is that it's a starring vehicle for John Carradine, who didn't really get that and was, one of the great character actors of classic Hollywood and was always called on by John Ford and others to fulfill certain roles. But this is really one of, if not perhaps the only major example where he essentially got a film tailored for his own personal strengths and got to just run with it, even if it's only 72 minutes long and was made at PRC under very limited constraints. So it's a joy to see John Carradine essentially get to cut loose and enjoy being the lead focus and the lead actor in a film. When he's on screen, the energy is off the charts. The atmosphere of the film is also quite remarkable, especially for a PRC film. It's very obvious this was made by Edgar G. Ulmer, who could work magic out of limited budgets, and would most famously do so in the noir masterpiece Detour, just a little bit later in 1945. The atmosphere is really most exemplified by the incredible visuals, which is something, again, you don't expect from a PRC film, but the actual cinematographer, even though he's not credited was actually Eugen Schufftan, the famous inventor of the Schufftan process, and was famously involved in a good number of the German Expressionist classics, including, of course, Metropolis. So you essentially had a genius cinematographer who would later win an Oscar for shooting The Hustler in 1961, sort of almost moonlighting shooting this PRC film and adding just an incredible level of class and artistry to the visuals that feeds into the atmosphere that Ulmer generated, that is all serving to enhance a fantastic John Carradine performance. There's also great support from seeing Nils Asther playing the sort of thankless role of the police inspector who's trying to find the serial killer Bluebeard. Asther was always, I think, underrated and has his usual wonderful screen presence here, but it's a rather thankless part. It's very much perfunctory. And that, I think, also gets into what the film's major issue is. It's a 72-minute PRC film, yes. Its budget is extremely limited, yes. But it's also got the sort of plot and writing of a 72-minute PRC film. There's obviously not much runtime to play with in terms of story and character development, but the plot itself is extraordinarily basic and simple, and thus the real draws of the film and what makes it special and something you might want to return to are the lead performance of John Carradine, the incredible visuals, the wonderful atmosphere and style. But outside of that, it's unfortunately a very generic story and script. The 72-minute runtime isn't helped by the fact that a good chunk of the film, since it's only 72 minutes, there's an entire portion of the film devoted to showing the Carradine character give a puppet show, and it's a puppet rendition of Faust, which is, quite fascinating to see, and it's actually run through, but it's also an extended performance, and it lasts for several minutes, and it's towards the start of the film. So not only does the viewer shift around a little bit in the seat, it also takes time away from the developing story. So one gets the sense, and it is discussed in the supplements, that Ulmer was, of course, very much devoted to getting this sort of mini rendition of Faust in puppet form into the film, and was actually a fan of puppetry. And that's all well and fine, but it does sort of take up a significant portion of an already short film. So my major issue with Bluebeard as a film is that the story's not really at the level of the performance and the atmosphere. There are great moments, but they're undercut by a script that's perfunctory in too many areas. Also, if you're a classic horror fan, you can't help but get the feeling that it echoes elements of some of the classic Universal films, particularly and most notably Robert Florey's Murders in the Rue Morgue from 1931, which also opens with a woman's body being recovered in the Seine in Paris in full period setting with full German expressionist flavor. And while Bluebeard has incredible atmosphere, it never reaches the sort of delirious heights of Murders in the Rue Morgue. And Bluebeard also ends in a very similar way with a rooftop chase through period set Paris. So it's impossible to not feel echoes of the Robert Florey picture and not think of Murders in the Rue Morgue. This would make a great double feature because it almost feels like one runs into the other. The style's, of course, very different, and you can still tell that Bluebeard is being made on PRC levels in terms of lower budget, and they're having to work really hard to try and get around that, and they do a great job, but if you see a PRC film, you can tell it's a PRC film no matter what. So I really do think a lot of the production background and the actual crew information does start to feed more into one's appreciation of the film. Knowing that the actress Sonia Sorel, who plays the first sort of love interest of Bluebeard, the sort of woman assisting him with the puppet show at the opening, actually became John Carradine's wife during the course of making this film, or just afterwards. So there was great personal history involved with this film, and also this was the film that Carradine would always reference and watch with people and reference in interviews as one of his favorite, if not his favorite performance, because it's the one time he got to have the lead in a film and really sink his teeth into a character, even if it was a 72-minute PRC film. That's what really makes Bluebeard special. And the fact that you've got Edgar G. Ulmer doing a passion project of his and really supporting Carradine as the lead. And that's really the one time he got to do that in his career. And then having Schufftan shoot the film so beautifully and adding such a level of class and artistry and that sort of highbrow flavor to something that typically would not have anything like that. So it's an interesting sort of mixture of artistry and great performance that is compromised by being made at PRC and not really having the greatest script. There are thankfully enough interesting elements in the performances and the development of the psychology of the lead character and why this Bluebeard actually kills and why he paints his victims first. And then this is finally explained fully in an extraordinarily eerie and well done flashback sequence where we see the story of the first murder victim and what established this sort of an unfortunate trend of killing one's artistic models. So it's a film that has great effectiveness and great atmosphere, great performances, but another symptom of it being made at PRC and another thing that really drags it down and arguably just as much as the script that I think is unfortunately definitely on the iffier side. The film has a score that is a good score, in fact, I think better than a lot of other PRC films, but it's an incessant one. It runs for most of the feature and is quite loud and really diminishes the effectiveness of a lot of the scenes. I know I'm not alone in feeling this way. I've seen other people express the same feelings. This is one of those films where you see it and you kind of wish the score would just go away. or just tone it down a notch, or maybe take a break or a breather. This is a score that needed some definite editing and better spotting because it really undercuts a number of sequences. They're still good sequences and have great performances and great moments, but they're having to fight the score, and so unfortunately the score is overbearing and at times does diminish the effectiveness of the film. So I think the real negatives of Bluebeard in terms of the overall experience are that the score is a bit overdone and far too excessive in how much it runs through the film, almost like musical wallpaper. It's wall-to-wall in areas. I do think while the idea of having a complete puppet rendition of an entire sequence from Faust was a quite notable, striking idea, especially for a PRC film, it does go on for so long in a film with a very short runtime that it does unfortunately leave less room for more story development. And then last but certainly not least is that I wish the script was better, but had this been made at Universal as Ulmer originally wanted to make it, it obviously would have had a stronger script. So that is really, I think, the element that is most tied to it being made at PRC in 1944. I think Ulmer and company put in as much of themselves and injected as much artistry as they could into this project. And frankly, I'm kind of amazed that PRC signed off on this. I think they just looked at it from a perspective of, oh, it's a maniac killer in Paris. Yeah, we can sell it that way. Because if Ulmer and everyone else had tried to sell the actual film they had made to actually get it approved, I don't know if PRC would have gone for something, again, with so many highbrow tendencies to it. All of this, I think, makes Bluebeard a remarkable film that is very, completely atypical of other PRC film experiences of the time period. And again, it's most notable for being a John Carradine vehicle. We don't really have a lot, if any, other of those. And so it's most remarkable and wonderful to look at for fans of John Carradine and looking at him getting a lead role and getting to just really go for broke, even if it's a short 72-minute film that has a script that's, rather perfunctory for most of its runtime. So it's a film with a lot of unique aspects. I don't think it's a great film, but it's certainly one that deserves critical praise and critical attention. And it's fantastic that we finally have a better looking and sounding version to look at, because as everyone who's seen this film, and as they've discussed in the extras, if you've ever tried to see this film before, it was in pretty much unwatchable state due to the extraordinarily poor transfers that existed, and typically horrible public domain standard definition transfers made from terrible print sources. So this disc is one you definitely want to pick up simply for the transfer alone, even though it is not a restoration. It is really the first release of the film since 1944 on the original run that has actually been watchable. So to discuss the picture quality of this new Paramount master on the Kino Lorber release, it's credited as a 4K scan and HD master from Paramount done in 2020 on this Kino disc. This is a scan of some print element, and it hasn't really been restored at all. This is very much a preservation scan and master. So you do need to expect this is going to have plenty of wear and inherent element issues. I'm sure they transferred probably what the best print they had in terms of source, and this somehow has wound up under the control of Paramount. And thankfully, they just did essentially an as-is scan and didn't get into their typical destructive mastering practices that they typically do when they actually remaster or restore a film. So this is very much an as-is presentation on this Kino release, but again, it's a modern high-resolution print scan. Compared to everything we've had before or every other version that's floating around, it's a night and day difference, but don't expect this to be really pristine or very pleasant looking. It does have, scratches and wear and damage throughout. There is image fluctuation. There is image movement in terms of frame movement. There are a few tiny examples of missing frames here and there, and some quality dips when they seemingly had to mix in some lower quality sources. But those are very small moments, but you will notice them. All of this is pretty much standard in what to expect with a film like this, especially from a Poverty Row studio that's had a notoriously poor transfer history and no major official release before this point. So this is very much in keeping with other PRC and monogram titles that Kino has released from similar preservation scans. So, for example, if you've seen their Blu-ray of the Lugosi classic, The Devil Bat, that's light years ahead of previous transfers, but it's still pretty rough because it's a preservation master, not a complete restoration, and obviously they don't have the original negative to work from. So it's in keeping with all the other Poverty Row classics that have gotten modern HD preservation masters. So do go in knowing that this is not a restoration, and seeing 4K scan on the back doesn't mean that this is a brand spanking new 4K master in HD. It's merely Paramount scanned whatever print source they had, and this is literally it. This is just a preservation scan. There are some spots where the wear and damage is heavier, but those are thankfully fleeting. There's also a couple spots where you actually see changeover cues, so that indicates this must have been a release print that they had to scan, and obviously the original negative is long gone. So it does seem that Paramount had a release print of Bluebeard, and that's what they scanned for this. Since the film is in the public domain, there are of course other versions you can look at, but all of them are going to be in horrible quality. So this really is the version you want to pick up if you want to see the film. However, if you're curious just to look at the film and you're not sure if you want to actually purchase the film on Blu-ray without seeing the film first, the Film Masters channel on YouTube has uploaded a newer scan of a print of their own. It's not as high quality of a scan in terms of, the overall appearance, and the element is in similar condition in terms of heavy damage and wear. But if you're curious to actually see the film first before getting the Blu-ray, and you were wondering if there's any version online that's actually watchable and approaches the quality of this master, the version on the Film Masters YouTube channel is at least watchable quality, so you can look at the film in something approaching the quality you see on the Kino Blu-ray release, and thus see if you then want to purchase the Blu-ray release. I'll leave a link to that in the description below if you're curious just to see a watchable, decent version of the film if you don't want to purchase the Blu-ray without seeing the film first. The encoding of this Kino disc is also quite solid. It's at an average of 30 to 35 megabits per second, which is what you want to see overall on a Blu-ray release. And since it's a very short film, there obviously shouldn't be any space issues on the disc. And that's also important because Kino discs are very hit or miss in terms of how good their encoding is, as most are not very well encoded, and then more recent titles, since they changed encoding houses, have really taken a nosedive overall in terms of their Blu-rays and UHDs having noticeably more and more lesser encodes and encoding issues. So it's always nice to see a Kino disc actually have a good encoding job. Now, in terms of the audio, we have the original mono track in lossless DTS HDMA mono. It's, of course, like the feature transfer, a preservation transfer, and so you need to expect the track is going to have all kinds of defects where it's got hiss, it's got lower quality moments, it's got some pops and ticks, it's got some warble and some crackle and distortion in the louder music passages, and especially in the main title, but all of that is to be expected, and from what I've seen of other previous terrible condition copies, the audio is also much improved as the picture is. So it's basically an example of it is what it is. I don't think they got too heavy-handed with any noise reduction or audio processing, and this, again, like the picture, is very much a preservation master and is at least improved over the horrible condition copies that were around before this point. Now, in terms of the packaging and artwork, we have an original poster used by Kino on a slipcover. This surprisingly got a slipcover, which they don't often do on catalog standard Blu-rays. It's usually more of their big name titles and UHDs. These, of course, will only be for the first print run, so chances are by now they have sold out of the slipcover, but it's always nice when you can get one of these on a more obscure catalog title. We have the title on the spine, and then the rear is in the typical Kino layout, advertising this is a modern Paramount 4K scan and HD master, and otherwise is in the generic Kino layout. The case carries the same artwork and, of course, the generic Kino spine, and then the rear has the same information. The disc is just the standard generic Kino label. Now, to discuss the supplemental features, the major draw of this release, in addition to this being a brand new preservation master that's far better quality than all past versions, is that we have not one, but two fantastic commentaries from classic horror greats in terms of historians and the sort of typical big name rogues gallery of historians in the classic horror realm, who typically make, in my opinion, the best classic catalog title commentary tracks that are a great balance of extraordinarily information-packed, but also enjoyable to listen to. So the first track is actually a combination track. We have Greg Mank along with Tom Weaver doing a back and forth in terms of talking through the 72 minutes of the film and giving you all kinds of incredible details about Carradine's life and career, the experience of making this film, of course, Ulmer's story and background, and how this film originally was to have been made as a Universal project back during the 1930s, and then how eventually it got to PRC and how it got made, and also rather nicely debunking some of the legends surrounding this film and giving you more of the nitty-gritty production detail in another fantastic commentary track that goes along with any of the other tracks that they have been involved with or done. All of the commentaries with Mank or Weaver are ones that are certainly worth your time. And then we get the bonus of having a second commentary from David Del Valle, who talks at great length about the film and Carradine as both, of course, a great actor, and this being a great, really the major film showpiece role for him, but also as a person, as Del Valle was quite friendly with Carradine for a good number of years. So you get a second great critical commentary with great personal insight as well, that manages to not repeat elements of the first commentary, which is always something to worry about when you have multiple commentaries on the same film. It's very tough to not cover the same ground. So it's really nice that you have two great commentaries from three great commentators who all manage to find unique material. So you can listen to both commentaries back to back and not have three people repeating the same thing. So this disc is made all the more worthwhile, and I think an essential recommendation among Kino titles as a very affordable disc that has a great preservation master and thus the best version of a film that has been very obscure and only existed in poor condition copies. And then you get the added benefit of not one, but two outstanding commentary tracks. As is usual, Kino includes a gallery of trailers relating to the film or members of the cast and crew. This is not credited on the packaging, but it's actually a gallery of trailers for other films Kino has released, and as usual, they will vary in quality. Some are upscaled standard definition and not super great quality, some are actually HD, but it's always nice to sort of go through these. Unfortunately, there is no trailer for Bluebeard included, as seemingly one does not survive, but we have an HD trailer for the genre classic The Mad Doctor, followed by a standard definition upscale trailer of The Undying Monster. And there's a nice HD print scan trailer for The Spider-Woman Strikes Back. We then get a standard def upscale textless trailer for the Lodger remake. We also get trailers for the films in the sci-fi Ulmer collection that Kino put out, bringing three of Ulmer's 1950s and later science fiction Poverty Row films together. The standout being The Man from Planet X, which has a trailer here as a standard def upscale, but strangely, this one is in a 1.85:1 aspect ratio and looks rather stretched and cropped. So unfortunately, there's some aspect ratios with this, but it's at least got a version of the trailer here. We then have an HD trailer in 1.78:1 for Beyond the Time Barrier, which is the second of the films in the Ulmer collection. And then we have the third film, The Amazing Transparent Man, which is in a standard def upscale trailer at 1.78:1. And then finally, there's an HD 1.85:1 trailer for the genre classic Black Tuesday, starring Edward G. Robinson. So, and that's also a textless trailer as well. So you never quite know what you're going to get with these sort of Kino trailer galleries that are tacked on to almost all of their releases. But I do appreciate they still do this. I just wish they would actually, put that on the cover, because they typically don't, and let people know that there's at least some associated trailers. But also I wish they would all be good quality trailers, or properly put on the disc or properly transferred, as again, sometimes you run into quirks or issues, or trailers not looking super great, or running at the wrong frame rate, or as in this case, one of them in the wrong aspect ratio. So it's cool that they do these still. I like the idea of having associated trailers, and of course it advertises other Kino releases, but one would wish they would actually put it on the box, and that all the trailers were at least in acceptable quality or put on the disc properly. So all of that makes the Kino Lorber release of Bluebeard a very attractive and essential one for John Carradine fans, and I think really classic horror fans, or any fans of Edgar G. Ulmer's time at Poverty Row Studios. If you've loved Ulmer's films such as Detour or The Man from Planet X, then Bluebeard is an absolute must. I also think it's a must if you love his macabre, one-of-a-kind The Black Cat. This is very much in the same vein, and I think very much indicates where he would have gone had he been able to stay at Universal. I do think his treatment overall and being blackballed by the major studios for so long was truly ridiculous, and at least he was able to carve out a niche of his own, even though it wasn't easy going at the Poverty Row Studios. This is one of his Poverty Row films that is much more artistically minded, and where he was able to get a lot of his creative energies into the finished product. It's just it's a product that unfortunately that is compromised due to how it was made. It's the kind of film you look at and admire and appreciate just how much of the creative vision of everyone involved was able to make it through to the end, and that this film even got made in the first place is nothing short of miraculous. And now that we finally have a truly watchable and enjoyable presentation of the film for the first time pretty much ever, is a reason to celebrate in and of itself. Plus, you get a lovely original artwork, a very affordable asking price, with some nice trailers, but also the real other draw is that you get not one, but two outstanding, excellent commentaries from three of the great classic horror commentators. So you definitely get more than your money's worth on a Blu-ray release that otherwise might not look as appealing to some, as the film's only 72 minutes and it's relatively obscure outside of genre circles. All of this makes it an attractive Blu-ray package, and I think an essential one for all classic horror fans, and especially fans of classic Universal horror, as this very much slots in nicely as an adjacent film to the classic 30s and 40s Universal horror films, and with many associated names. It's a film that I know I will be returning to multiple times, and now I thankfully have the best and proper viewing option as outside of that one version I found on the Film Masters YouTube channel. Every other copy of this film you will find is absolutely deplorable, and the quality is so bad it makes the film pretty much unwatchable. So if you want to properly see and enjoy this film and understand its importance and understand the production history of the film, then the Kino Blu-ray is really a no-brainer, and it's an essential title to have in your classic horror collection. So as always, I hope my babblings about classic films, physical media, and the world of classic horror and classic horror adjacent films has been at least somewhat fun and informative. I do think this is one of the essential Kino titles in terms of their Blu-ray releases of Poverty Row films that otherwise either have very poor public domain releases, or, as in the case of Bluebeard, a film that has never had a proper release before this point. And very nicely, they have sweetened the deal by including not one, but two outstanding commentaries. So that, along with the affordable asking price, I think makes it an essential title for all fans of classic horror and all fans of John Carradine or Edgar G. Ulmer. So as always, please do keep supporting both studios and boutique labels by buying films on disc in order to help keep both physical media and film culture alive. And as always, thank you ever so much for watching.